Hi there, it's me, Matt Lane, co-host of Because of the Universe, and it seems like you have missed a show, but don't worry, here it is. We hope you enjoy it.
Your award-winning student radio station.
This is your role.
Good morning, it's 11 o'clock on Saturday and you are listening to Because the Universe, your fortnightly satirical science radio panel discussion show with him, Harry Manners, the smooth quantum operator.
Oh, well, thank you very much, that was excellent. And he is Matthew Lane, Lord of the Thousand Island Archipelago, hailing from the fabled darklands of Punta Rayam, Professor Emeritus of the floating University of Upani.
I see you've looked me up on Wikipedia.
I have.
Every week,
the entry
Harry,
changes every day.
Every week it becomes
more and more extravagant, doesn't it?
Just, I really have absolutely.
It's the highlight of my week coming up with those introductions.
It's the highlight of my week hearing them.
Thank you very much.
Oh, anyway, so it's going to be the normal repertoire today. We're going to have a look at the news, some science-related news that's been going on in the last fortnight, last 2 weeks, and then we're going to introduce our two guests who are here to help us discuss our topic. We'll bring them in a bit later on, and then we'll get into the proper discussion of the topic. That's the plan, isn't it, Harry?
It is. It's usually the plan.
It is, and we'll have
as to whether that goes to plan.
A little bit of music as well and things like that.
Yeah.
Okay then. Exciting stuff. Let's get.
Yes, indeed. So we've got a bit of news, I think.
With the news, shall we, Harry? Do you want to go first?
I shall. I'll start us off with the news that there's soon to be the launch of the world's first trans-world solar plane expedition. So within the month, this kind of new species of solar-powered aircraft is going to embark on a round-the-world journey without a single landing. So it's starting off in Abu Dhabi. And it's a single aircraft which is going to be crewed by a single pilot. It's called Solar Impulse 2, and it will take charge from the air. So essentially it's going to charge on the wing.
What engines is it using?
I'm not sure.
So it's electric?
It seems to be an electric aircraft, which is propelled through the air by solar panels. It doesn't have to land. This is supposedly to try and jumpstart this new kind of technology where we'll have drones which will never land. I believe this is something that was recently featured in the film Interstellar.
It was in Interstellar.
It was, and
it was an Indian drone, wasn't
it? Indeed, yeah. This is a genuine kind of concept where we're trying to get surveillance drones and things like that, and things like the delivery drones used by Amazon. All this kind of thing essentially is to automate an army of robots which will essentially be permanently in flight.
How long are they thinking this thing's going to take to go around the planet?
They're thinking several months.
Right.
I think it's planned for a 2-month. It seems my news indicates it's a 2-month journey planned. But
your sources?
My sources, yes. Well, see, this is unprecedented because this is the first time that it's ever flown across an ocean, and therefore to get across the Pacific is something that they have no record of, so they have no idea how long.
This is exciting. Take. It's like the Wright brothers all over again. Isn't
Indeed.
It?
So it's already completed its first trans-American continental journey. So it's gone from coast to coast in the US, and this is the first time it will cross the Pacific. First, it's going to cross the Atlantic from Abu Dhabi to the Americas, and then the big challenge is really crossing the Pacific.
Yeah. I want to know how those engines work.
I do as well.
Something powered by electricity that's... I mean, it can't be. Well, could it be?
It could be propellers. Yeah, I imagine it, because it is a very light aircraft. I've seen pictures of it. It's only big enough for one pilot.
Right.
And essentially this pilot has facilities on board to allow him to eat and sleep and
so it's
go
less
to the bathroom
likely
things
to be
without moving.
High-tech Sabre air breathing.
No, I don't think it's any no jet engines or anything like that. I think it could be a little buzzy little propeller, like a little motor.
This really is the Wright brothers.
It is, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Exciting.
Yeah, it is. I look forward to hearing more about that. Hopefully we'll have something in the next 2 weeks about how that's gone, maybe.
Absolutely.
Okay, I've got one. I don't know whether you remember. I can't remember whether this is before or after Christmas. I think it must have been before. Not on the show, but I was moaning to you, Harry, about an article I had read criticising the World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control.
Yes, I remember
about the flu vaccine. So they have to way before Christmas. It's usually about 10 months before the winter's actually coming in. They have to pick the 3 strains they think are going to become dominant and then mass produce the vaccine, because obviously it takes a while to make enough vaccine for everyone to be able to use it. So there's always a chance that one of the other 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe even flu strains is going to become dominant. You don't know. You have to make an educated guess.
Right.
And this year, one of the other strains did become dominant. And it was also one of the more dangerous strains. So what we're now seeing in the news is a bit of a scare going on. This is the BBC. Flu vaccine barely effective against the main viral strain. And it's not that this isn't true. To some degree, it is true. The vaccines we've got aren't really doing very much to this particular strain of flu.
I see. So this is just kind of a happenstance where the statistics have just not worked.
It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
But I wanted to say to everyone, the thing that the professionals, that the medics, that the people who know what they're talking about are saying is still get vaccinated. The vaccine is going to help. It's going to protect you against a number of other strains of flu, particularly if you know anyone that's old, particularly encourage them to. So I don't want any of this anti-vaccination nonsense.
No. Well, it's always surprising, isn't it? The level to which the public simply are uninformed with regard to this kind of thing.
Difficult.
That flu is flu. And this could easily be billed as, there was swine flu and that's gone now. It's kind of, as soon as it's gone from the news, it's gone from people's minds for all time. And therefore, it's usually thought of as flu is flu. Yeah. And if the vaccines don't work, that's it.
Don't worry, though. That's
not the case.
No, this is not a pandemic or an endemic. This isn't really... it's being blown slightly out of proportion. There are antiviral drugs available anyway, should you get this strain.
Lovely.
Harry, you've got another story?
I have indeed. So I want to talk a little bit about something a little bit more obscure, but I think it's quite exciting. So at the University of Seoul in South Korea, a group of engineers and applied physicists are developing a kind of rewritable paper. So they've just published their results. They've been working on it for a few years.
Did they publish on the rewritable paper? Or?
They didn't, which is kind of shooting themselves in the foot. But, there's time for that. So essentially, it's a new kind of transparent paper. It's a kind of plastic which you can write on in different inks. And you can reuse it up to 20 times. So it can be very easily erased and rewritten on. It uses a translucent plastic, and it can only accommodate at the moment 3 primary colours. So you can have a red sheet, a green sheet, or a blue sheet. But they're looking at incorporating it. And it uses, different dyes and so forth. And it has the potential really to save millions of tons of paper a year. It's a real environmental solution in a kind of going back to the drawing board kind of sense. So
it's a flexible whiteboard.
Essentially, you could say that. The way that it works is that the dye reacts with redox reactions with titanium oxide crystals, and you expose them to UV light, and you can
all you A-level chemists will have done that.
Yes. So it's all the kind of it is standard chemistry.
Yeah,
just applied in this new kind of plastic. And I think it's just a very nice example of something where people aren't tinkering. People aren't trying to hash on something to make it slightly more efficient. They've gone away and they've redrafted this from scratch, and it has the real potential to revolutionise our green policy, because lots of companies are now taking interest in this. It's just been published, and it's a very young technology, as I said. But I think it's quite exciting to keep an eye on. This is something that
I think I'm going to have to look it up. I want to see a picture of this paper. I want to know what does it feel.
It looks like the kind of the paper that they put on the overhead projectors. They're just a standard
that kind of clear
film.
plastic.
Yeah, it looks like that. And essentially, you could write. At the moment, you can only write in 3 colours, but they're looking at integrating it into.
So that might be something that we see more of.
Indeed.
Okay, I've got another one. As always, the title irritates me. Just
the title.
Just the title irritates me. It's I keep seeing. I'm sure people will have seen it. The 3-parent baby.
Yes.
That title, I find that title irritating. I feel that it doesn't properly inform you as to what's going on.
No, it's quite misleading.
It's not that it's untrue. I think it gives people who are going to be anti this an awful lot of weaponry that isn't really there.
Yes, ammunition.
So what's going on? Mitochondria are described like the powerhouse of the cell, and they evolved from bacteria. And basically, what they do is they produce something called ATP that is basically the currency, if you like. It's the energy of a cell.
Yes.
And then they sit there. And they basically have their own genome, their own 38, 39 gene-long genome. I'm just being told by the BioMed in the student is 37.
37?
Okay.
37 what?
37 what?
37
genes.
I
genome.
See. Right.
Anyway, so they have their own. And so if that's faulty, which it's quite likely to be actually, it's more likely to mutate than the main genome of a human. Right. If that's faulty, then you get mitochondrial diseases, related diseases.
Yes.
And so the whole idea here is, well, if you replace the faulty mitochondrial DNA or the faulty mitochondria with healthy mitochondria, then your offspring isn't going to have that degenerate disease.
I see.
Which is a good
Right. So
thing.
you're saying it's like a transplant almost, that these genomes aren't related to each other in that sense.
Well, it is gene therapy to some degree. The important thing to note is that the mitochondrial DNA is in the mitochondria. It's not in the nucleus.
Yes.
It's not
So
actually
it's separate
in the
from the kind of gene
And so
produced
what's
in.
being proposed, or the law that has been passed, that this is now legal because this has been done way back in the 90s. Way back.
Way back.
So long
Yes,
ago.
So long ago, when I was around.
Oh, you were, you were still old.
I was.
Anyway, what's happening is they're saying, well, if you take a healthy egg cell
Right.
with healthy mitochondria, and then you put the female's nucleus from the unhealthy mitochondria egg cell into that nucleus. So you remove the nucleus from the donor cell, and then you put the nucleus you want into there, and then you do IVF. That means that a couple whose offspring would have the disease won't have it because there's no degenerate mitochondria.
Right.
Now, it's 3-parent in the sense that there is, between 0.2 and 2% of the DNA of another person, but it isn't in the genome of the child.
So it's nothing to do with the actual stuff that makes a person a person.
It's just in the mitochondria. There are people who are very anti it, saying, it's...
I don't find that at all surprising. There are always going to be dissenters in every kind of new revolution, aren't there?
But it's a step forward because it's going to... It's, in terms of... Well, not even in terms of treatment. People are not going to have these diseases. Hopefully, is where this will take us.
Well, it sounds wonderful. I think it is worth bringing up. Yeah. Just to solidify the point.
Yeah. And have you got another one?
I haven't. I'm done with
you.
Well,
I've got 2 really quick ones. Then.
Right,
you may remember in our last show we talked about bees and colony collapse disorder.
I remember.
Well, a paper has been published actually about that.
Oh, right.
Confirming that the world's most widely used insecticide is proven to damage bee brains. It prevents them from going home and prevents them from behaving normally in a colony, which is exactly what I said was the consensus, although it hadn't really been proven. It was the scientific consensus. Well, now we're pretty damn sure that that's what's going on.
Well, that's fantastic.
And it is neonicotines.
Yeah. Well,
so now we know. Let's hope people pay attention, otherwise we're going to lose the bees. Like we
absolutely, gives credit to the argument.
Yeah. And finally, a kitten delivery service in Australia.
Of course, the Australians.
15 minutes of cat cuddling.
Oh, for 15 minutes?
Yeah.
So that essentially you get...
So you make an order and they arrive at your workplace with a kitten for you to cuddle.
I don't know whether that's the best or the worst idea in history.
I think it's funny.
Because, what's to stop you just reordering again and again?
I don't know.
Or
it's
1,000 orders at once. I mean, you could your office suddenly inundated with 1,000 kittens.
That would be brilliant. Oh, no, if there was someone you didn't like. Fill their office with... Anyway.
Just for 15 minutes.
Just for 15 minutes. Okay, Harry, let's break for a song. We'll bring the guests in, and if they have any interesting input on any of those news stories, they'll let us know, and then we'll find out the topic for the week.
Lovely. We're going to take a little break, and we'll go out on Imagine Dragons' I Bet My Life.
Varsity 2015.
It's in! It's Richard Belfit!
Join Raw 12:51 AM and Warwick TV as we cover the latest fixtures.
It's a driver commentary! A lovely, lovely little step there!
Watch basketball, ice hockey, tennis and more throughout week 4 and 5.
Looks as though that Warwick are set to get yet another win over Coventry University, yet another win over their rivals.
Just visit varsity.warwicksu.com and join in with the action by tweeting #WarwickVarsity.
Well, that's the only good tackle I've seen by any Coventry player all day. Now, there is a mascot fight going on!
This is more than handbags!
You're listening to Your Raw.
Your Raw. On 12:51 AM.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to Because the Universe on Raw. So we want to give out our contact details before we go on with the show. So you can get in touch with us through Twitter. So it's at Because the Universe, at Cos the Universe, Cos the Universe. Facebook, so that's facebook.com/Because the Universe, or BecauseTheUniverse@AOL.com is our email address. So
Indeed, and Ducky has hinted to me that it may be a slightly controversial topic this week.
Really?
So do get in contact if you have an opinion, and
Wonderful.
we might read out anything that you say if we have time.
Sounds excellent.
Right then, Harry, shall we bring in the guests?
Wonderful, let's bring them in.
Wonderful. Let's start with Akshay. You've actually been on Because the Universe before.
Yes.
You were with us for our first show, Do We Have to Die?
Yeah, I was. Yes, I was.
So remind anyone that's already heard you, or tell anyone that hasn't, who are you, what do you do, and give us a truth and a lie.
Oh, I'm a second-year biomedical scientist. I'm from London. My truth and lie, I've been skiing in America, and I've been skiing in Europe. I've just realised. No, just go with it.
Okay.
I've been skiing on a mountain in America. I've been skiing on a mountain in Europe.
Okay. Harry.
Hello.
What do you think? Skiing on a mountain in America or Europe?
I would say America.
Well, for the sake of
being contrary,
I'm going to say Europe.
Okay.
I've been skiing on a mountain in Europe, but technically, I have been skiing.
Got me.
Take that, Mr. Manners.
Fine.
I have been skiing in Europe because I've been indoor skiing in Europe. I've never been on a mountain in Europe.
Right, it's fine. It's fine. I was still right, and Harry was wrong.
Wait, did you say America?
That's the important
No,
bit,
it's Europe.
No, it's America.
You said you just.
I made a mistake. It's America. I've been skiing on a mountain in America, but in Europe, I've been indoor skiing. So Harry's technically right.
What though?
So what were we just saying, Matt? Was that some kind of jeering I was hearing?
I didn't say anything at all. Let's quickly go over to
Sam.
Sam, tell us a little bit about yourself, your subject, who you are, and give us a truth and a lie.
Okay, I'm Sam. I'm doing a master's in international political economy, which sounds probably more complicated than it actually is.
Okay.
It's my 4th year at Warwick, and my truth and lie, I've been lost in the Arctic Circle. And I've been lost in the Palace of Westminster.
You've been lost in the Palace of Westminster is your lie, I reckon.
Arctic Circle. I think maybe that, because you could go to Lapland or something, and that's technically there.
Your profile picture looks cold.
I'd say that. Yeah, the Arctic Circle.
The Arctic Circle was actually the lie.
Lost in the House of Parliament.
Times.
Wow. How did that happen?
Well, I was interning for my MP last summer. And I was given a pass, and I got time to just go around and explore. And
lost.
There were lots of very interesting corridors that all.
Are there skeletons everywhere?
I didn't see
people who've got lost.
Yes, that is what our Parliament is full of. Skeletons.
All right, that's a picture in my head.
That's okay.
There's lots of swords.
Really?
They're almost as interesting as skeletons.
Almost. I find skeletons. Anyway. Oh, well, thank you very much for coming on. We're very excited to have you. Did either of you have any particularly interesting opinions, do you think, on any of the news stories we brought up?
I was quite interested in the 3-person baby story.
I imagine as a BioMed.
Yeah, I think that not enough people know enough information, and I think for people to warrant their decision to go whether this is bad or this is good, I think some people will be heavily opinionated without knowing all of the facts, just reading what they read, just listening to the news or watching the news.
Yeah. So really, the layperson and even the interested scientist isn't going to know enough to have a really strong
unless you've read the papers.
Yes.
You won't know nearly enough that you need to.
Yeah.
I think it is quite surprising. It is easy to lose track of when you say, and scientists say. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean the relevant scientists.
No. Yeah, does it mean hearsay? Does it mean
the murmur around the community?
Exactly. Does that mean the murmur around the scientific community?
So what's actually happened is it's old science. It's really old. There were clinical trials back in the early 90s.
Yes.
And most of them were successful. And then when in 2002 it was successfully lobbied to have it all shut down in the States, the rest of the world followed suit.
Right.
It's what happened.
And now have there been papers published or?
So it's open again for clinical trials. It's not as though this is a thing that's going to.
Well, it passed legislation
to just to make it legal to do it though. It's not even legal to do it from a research perspective.
Yes.
So I think this will have opened it up for more research.
That is good. I think it's undeniably a good thing.
In a purely pragmatic and practical sense, it's a good thing.
Yes, it will save lives.
Yeah.
Good.
Any other opinions? We might come back to it later.
Yeah.
I have a slightly alternative opinion on it.
Go on, tell us. Interesting.
We can talk about the science perspective, but what about the ethical perspective?
Well, you see, I personally, and I know people won't agree with me, I personally do not think that there is a divide.
There clearly is.
in the sort of the way I like to do science is I like to also think about all of the ethics as part of that.
Oh yes, yeah. I'd agree.
The modern purely objectivist movement, I'm not overly fond of.
No, scientists on it.
Completely.
Science devoid of humanity isn't science.
But we are always going to be subjective agents doing it. So. Yes. Anyway, sorry, Sam.
Well, we can do experiments that may advance science, but not necessarily ethical.
Yeah.
You could talk about human cloning, for example, as an issue which I think most people would accept wasn't ethical, but it probably would advance science.
So by science, there you're talking about our scientific knowledge, aren't you? You're talking about advancing knowledge,
which again plays on this idea of science as some kind of abstract
nebulous
entity. Yes, an idea, and it also builds on the kind of the 19th century perspective of the scientist as the Frankenstein doctor, the crazy man who has
on
no
their own
compass.
in a room.
Yes,
which is actually a very fashionable thing at the moment for the media to be portraying. That idea of a scientist on their own,
tearing away at nature's inner folds and producing monstrosities, which is unfortunate. I think it really does hamper science's relation with the community.
But we still have to remember that science is still governed by law.
Yes.
So we still have to
absolutely.
So it's not as objective as one might think. But you can't have a scientist that go, I'm going to go away and I'm going to do all these experiments. Well, no, you can't. The law says otherwise.
Absolutely, yes. But at the same time, we do have to beware of going the other way too far, in which sometimes you think the conception is that scientists have to be wrangled in lest they be left to their own devices.
When actually, most scientists are
things.
Perfectly ethical people.
Indeed,
of course,
in the sense that they are fully considerate of. Oh, I'm sorry, Sam. You're saying interesting things that trigger discussion.
Yes. Well, how do you define ethics? I mean, what's your ethical worldview? I mean, one scientist might have completely different ethical...
That's why we have ethics committees on scientific boards that run clinical trials. They decide what ethics are.
And so the important thing to note there is it's not as though it's ethics that somebody has just reasoned a priori from their armchair. It's always going to be informed by something empirical about the way in which the world functions and the consensus of the people who know about it.
It's also worth noting that in terms of it's a very interesting point Sam's made, that that how do you define your ethics, as opposed it almost implies that scientists are themselves a cohesive body of people separate from other people,
when actually they will all have different
everyone
views.
Has different views on ethics, and I think that to consider what do the scientists think is a non sequitur. It's a non sequitur. It's not
when
a question,
really you need to make it very clear you're just talking about the consensus of people who know what they're talking about,
essentially.
Yeah. So Ducky is, so for those of you who don't know, me and Harry are kind of just the servants of Ducky, the great soft duck,
his representative
who is in charge
in the real
of this
world.
show. I've got him. He's sending me little messages on my laptop screen because he's at home at the moment.
He's too busy.
He's too busy. And he's just telling me to stop this conversation because it's relevant to the topic. So I'm actually going to bring the topic in and let's start. So Ducky's just messaging me and he's telling me that the topic today the topic is... Oh, interesting. Is eugenics the natural solution to overpopulation?
Well, that is a heady topic indeed. I'm glad he warned us about that before so that we could get people to message in.
So do message in.
Yes, absolutely.
If you have any opinions as the show is going on. And I think, we'll have to have a proper ethical consideration type conversation. So we'll come back to some of the objections you've been raising, Sam, perhaps. We'll come back to them when we've probably fleshed out this topic.
Concept.
So is eugenics the natural solution to overpopulation? Harry, you were around when the Nazis were big.
I was.
Being as old as you are.
Yeah.
In fact, Sam, how old are you?
Me, I'm 22.
How old are you, Harry?
I'm 23.
Oh, you're still the oldest in the room.
I am still the oldest.
Good.
By all accounts.
Still take the mic.
Thank you very much.
So let's try and be clear on what we mean when we talk about eugenics. Or what is eugenics?
Eugenics is essentially the process of selecting certain traits that your society or yourself deem desirable and thereby prune the gene pool through some kind of selective method. So this is a very old idea. I mean, Aristotle famously talked about this in The Republic, which is in the 5th century BC. So this is thousands of years old, this idea. It's exploded, essentially, in the 19th and 20th century. It was hugely popular, essentially with Darwin's publication of The Origin of Species. You had Nietzsche talking about his concepts of the Superman and things like that. I think you can paraphrase, actually, Plato's seminal work. You can say, he argued that the state should always be controlled by the ruling class's reproduction. So essentially, you should always engineer the ruling class such that they take the state in the best direction.
That is an interesting concept.
It is, isn't it? But I think it's a very good illustration of the fact that this is a very old idea.
It carries with it an awful lot of baggage. It
does, because of course now we have to go on to the elephant in the room and talk about the Nazi.
So what exactly are we talking about? I mean, Akshay, are you able to elucidate for us here? Are you able to draw some lines, some try and distinguish between the murkiness and is eugenics a science? Is there a science that it kind of is now that it wasn't before? And
in one word, no. Eugenics isn't a science. You're effectively picking the most desirable characteristics and then going, okay, we're going to make humans do this because we want to, and that's not really scientific.
So let's be clear then, it's the application perhaps of some things we have learned from doing scientific
Yes, it's the application of scientific methods in a not scientific way. Because you have terms that come up like degenerate, quite broad terms, and you can't say, these many people are degenerate, so let's sterilise them and not let them breed.
You know, the definition of degenerate in this context is a subjective.
Absolutely. So it was coined. I think eugenics was coined in 1883 by Francis Galton.
Yes, Galton.
Yes. So his method of eugenics, his idea of eugenics was, we'll get the people that have the best characteristics, so the tallest, most athletic people, make them breed, make them make super babies. So that's positive eugenics because you're getting the most sort of people with the most attractive characteristics, and you're making them have children. That's positive. And the converse of that is negative eugenics, which is, we're not going to allow the lower classes to breed because they have undesirable characteristics. So we're going to do mass sterilisation and quite dark things like that.
And then, of course, Nazis, Aryan race.
I mean, Hitler was a huge fan of Nietzsche. And I think we can safely say he misinterpreted Nietzsche's intentions. This began in 1933 with the passing of... what was it called? It was the Law of Prevention of Genetically Diseased Offspring. So that was passed by the Nazi party, and that forced 400,000 sterilizations on the infirmed. And then in 1935, that was extended to include the Jewish race. That essentially, I think we can say, snowballed.
That's
something slightly more
classic
serious
example of negative eugenics. You've got the most undesirable characteristics, and you're going, let's sterilise so they can't have children. Yes, I mean, the USA actually undertook many forced sterilizations in the 20th century, along with, actually to this day, Eastern Europe, Peru and China still carry out this process regularly. But the USA, it's probably not very well known, but, the 48 states... 31 of the 48 states enacted this process, and in the 20th century, some 60,000 people were sterilized, which you wouldn't expect from... Well, you'd assume that America is typically something which is more insulated against this kind of extremism.
You would have thought,
Yeah.
So there is this type of eugenics, or eugenics, the way we're defining it, is to say that it is identifying a trait or characteristic as desirable or undesirable, and then by controlling human breeding, trying to breed that characteristic in or out of humanity.
But I've got a question.
Go on.
It's... who decides what's desirable and what's undesirable? And that's quite a heavy topic.
It is. It's not really... at the moment, there isn't anyone, is there? Because
they can't.
Isn't it a particularly active
not especially
field in any way?
No.
Well, it's interesting because for a long time it was attempted to be developed into a science. It was considered among the sciences for decades. But you mentioned Galton, who coined this term and did lots of work in developing the field. But as I mentioned as well, only a few decades before, it was Darwin and his publication of The Origin of Species which really drove this. And something that Darwin was really popular about, and something that's not really very well known, is his attitude towards... It wasn't kind of the hummingbirds and all this in the Galapagos Islands which developed his idea of this. It was the idea of when they sailed around the Cape Horn and the savages in South America, they had a huge amount of contact with these people, and Darwin essentially believed that these people would inevitably be bred out as having weaker genes by the colonization of Christian vanguards from the Western civilization, and it's quite strange to think that someone we think of as being very wise and scientific and prescient had this kind of prejudice mixed up in all of that.
Yeah. But then actually that isn't surprising.
No, not at all. It wasn't unusual at all for the time, and yes, it was based on observations. You could argue that's a valid interpretation of his observations.
Well, to some extent, you have to ask the question: did it happen?
But did what happen?
His prediction.
It did.
It did.
It did happen. Yes, absolutely.
He wasn't wrong.
No, he wasn't wrong. But I think it's quite surprising that it, as we said, it's quite interesting. It relates back to the ethical concern earlier that he thought that was God's plan. It was an ethical imperative that these people be made extinct, essentially.
Yeah. So there is a darker side.
Yes, there is.
A dark side.
Having said that, though, you keep talking about Darwin, but eugenicists, really, the research done by eugenicists really follow another scientist, Gregor Mendel. Because Mendelian genetics say that there's So what Gregor Mendel did was crossbreed thousands and thousands of peas to find different characteristics, what colour they were, what could you breed with what to give this characteristic.
A-level biology students listening in.
Selective breeding. Selective breeding, exactly. However, what we do forget is not everything follows Mendelian genetics. We're different to peas. We don't work like that. We don't follow Mendelian traits. So you can't breed out something. You can't breed something in the same way. You can't say we're recessive or dominant for a certain allele.
Right. So it is more complicated.
It's much. We're not peas.
Yes.
Well, some of us aren't.
Some of them are peas.
Some people are not peas.
Breaking news, ladies and gentlemen.
Here first.
Turn off the television and turn up the radio. We have finally come across the answer.
Some people
are not peas.
Yes. Quite.
Thank you.
That is I think it's absolutely a point worth making, because that is a huge misconception that people think, and it's often reported in the news and in textbooks and everywhere. The kind of thing that scientists have discovered the gene for X disease, or for height or heart disease.
Absolutely.
And it's just not. It's just not that.
Somewhere in the vicinity of these genes.
Yes.
Maybe a combination of so many.
Exactly.
It's within this cluster of genes. We don't know exactly where, and then the newspaper goes, "It's actually this gene." No, it's not. No, it's not.
Yes, absolutely.
So,
worth thinking.
Let's try to, for the purposes of moving forward, let's try and draw a line slightly on eugenics.
Right.
Actually, you made a very interesting point when we broke for a song, so not on air, but to me, about the 3-person baby story, as a way perhaps of understanding. Well, in fact, you did call that eugenics.
It is, because you're selecting for the most desirable characteristic.
Yeah.
So you have the donor. So you have the father's sperm and you have the mother's egg, and then you have a surrogate mother's. So the nucleus is so they're IVF'd, and the nucleus is taken out of the mother's egg to. I've sort of explained this in a weird way. You got the father's sperm, you got the mother's egg. The nucleus is taken out of the mother's egg, and it's put into the surrogate's egg,
because the mother's egg is the one that has the
mitochondrial
the faulty
DNA.
Yes. So and then the sperm is sort of fertilizes this egg, which now has which has the mother's nucleus and the surrogate mother's mitochondrial DNA, to give a baby that is free of mitochondrial faults. So here, this is a way of selecting out a negative characteristic. This is quite a classic example of negative eugenics.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, a moment ago when you said who is it that decides which characteristics are desirable and undesirable, well, here you would just say by consensus it's everyone.
Apparently so.
In the sense that everyone would agree that having a disease caused by a faulty mitochondrial DNA is an undesirable characteristic.
Yes. And in this case is unnecessary. If you have the technology to prevent it, it's an unnecessary illness.
The problem is the slippery slope, though. We're starting here. Where do we end up?
And the slippery slope argument is a very difficult one.
Well,
because rarely is it
the slippery slope argument is a slippery slope.
It is a slippery slope.
Right.
In that the fact that something is a slippery slope, or could be a slippery slope, is not an argument not to do it. It's an argument to steward it effectively.
To be cautious and not to then rule out all subsequent.
But you are completely right.
Yes.
You are completely right that but as, and we've talked about this relatively extensively in other shows, the fact that and this isn't only true of science, this is true of absolutely every human endeavour, that as we learn more, we must apply what we learn.
Yes.
That's why we discover. This is true in every single, and when I say must, I don't mean it as an imperative. I just mean that in general, as you learn something, we as a race apply it. That's our motivation for trying to learn, is to find a new way of doing things.
Yes.
And so it is inevitable that every discovery is on a slope.
Yes.
Everything.
Yes. But does it have to be a slippery slope? That's where does the distinction come in? Where this is a slippery slope and this is just a slope that we have to come. over sort of.
When actually, I don't think I particularly in this case or in cases like this, I don't find it to be a slippery slope. The very fact that there has been such strong legislation for such a long time preventing all research in this area, makes it seems very strange to me that people say it could be a slippery slope. Well, it's clearly
it's
not.
Been perfectly safeguarded until now.
The likelihood that it would become a slippery slope is so slim because there is public feeling that is often quite anti this sort of thing, and for genuine, valid ethical reasons.
Yes, it's quite fortuitous that it is that way around, as opposed to something that is ignored and unknown,
in that
and
it
then
prevents
suddenly
it
becomes
from
known.
being a slippery slope.
Yes, indeed. It's out in the fore. It's out in the open.
In that, like we've said with, and the reason I don't like this being a 3-person baby is, I mean, you may be able to shed a little bit of light here.
Yes.
As far as I'm aware, the small fraction of a % of the DNA that comes from the donor isn't going to be in the full genome of that child.
It's going to just be in the mitochondria. It's not going to be in the nuclear DNA.
So the child is only characterised by the parent DNA.
Apart from the mitochondria.
Apart from the mitochondria.
Yes.
But in who the child is. In that loosest of sense.
You can't really.
Well, perhaps
who the child is also environmental.
Yes.
How they're brought up, who they're brought up by.
So I mean in the
blank slate tabula rasa. Once they're born, the baby is a baby, and changing their mitochondrial DNA won't have changed the essential baby that would have been born.
Well, it would have, because you're changing the mitochondrial DNA, but it wouldn't have changed the nuclear DNA. I think you're taking it. Maybe you're making it too simple for me to dilute it down to that level.
So if it can't be diluted, explain.
Okay, I can say. Well, so you've got 80,000, 90,000 genes in the nucleus.
Yeah.
That's from the parents.
Yeah.
You've got 37 out of that, which are mitochondrial, and that's not in the nucleus.
But that mitochondrial DNA, that's only coding for
the
behavior of mitochondria.
That's correct. So you're not coding for them.
Everything else is still going to be as it would have been.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
That was kind of what I was.
The only problem with that, the only problem with what you're saying, is that do we know that these 37 they only code for mitochondria? That's correct. But do we know
that they don't in some way?
They might. I don't know enough about that to say.
Which is why it's important that this research is done.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
I think we should break for a song, actually.
Let's break for a song, and then I want to go back to, because I want us to get to overpopulation. I think then we'll just turn to Sam.
Yes. Sounds like a wonderful time to bring in some ethical issues and so forth.
Yeah, and have a proper discussion around that. So let's break for a song, Harry.
Lovely. Let's go out with Greek Tragedies at the Wombat.
You're listening to Your Raw.
Your Raw. On 12:51 a.m.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to Because the Universe on Raw. I'm just going to give out our contact details one more time in case you want to get in touch. So you can get in touch with us through Twitter at CosTheUniverse, CosTheUniverse, Facebook, so facebook.com/BecauseTheUniverse, or through email. That's becausetheuniverse@aol.com.
And since this topic may be controversial,
yes, you
may have an opinion. Do let us know if
Absolutely.
you do. In fact, we have just decided, this may or may not happen, but we're going to actually. I know the topic was meant to be: is eugenics the natural solution to overpopulation? We're going to make this a 2-part show.
We are. Well, we plan to.
We hope to. We're going to talk about eugenics today, so we're going to finish that off. We've got a quarter of an hour to talk about the ethical side.
Lovely.
And then we're going to talk about overpopulation in 2 weeks' time. Potentially with these 2 guests. We'll have to see whether or not they are free.
Yes, wonderful. So if you have a question that is related to overpopulation,
eugenics,
absolutely, or eugenics, message in now and we'll answer it next week. Indeed, if we don't get to it now.
That's a good idea.
Fantastic.
Right. Okay. So we've been talking about eugenics, and we're going to now have an ethical conversation. And so this is kind of open to everyone, but we're going to go over to Sam, who seems to have a couple of things to say.
Yes, excellent.
Sam.
Okay, well, I think I'd start by saying we've had a very good conversation about science, but I think there sometimes can be a sense of scientific arrogance, enlightenment arrogance, that we now have science, we think we know everything. And I think that can sometimes be unhelpful. So when we're dealing with medical ethics, we need to have a proper ethical framework about what we're trying to achieve here. And if you take the perspective that humanity is the most important. That's always the end. And we should use that. We shouldn't use humans as the means by playing around with DNA and by testing on humans, things like that.
So is this kind of drawing a natural and unnatural divide? Is this to say that some things are natural and some things are unnatural, and perhaps we can raise ethical objections to erring on the side of the unnatural?
What do you mean by unnatural?
I'm not entirely sure. I just want to work out exactly what.
I think you can make that distinction. But I think the most important thing is to realise that we are all human. Yeah. And saying things like some people are more desirable people than others is a very dangerous route to go down. I think that can devalue some people.
I agree. I completely agree with that. Yes, so I want to make it absolutely as transparent as possible that at no point is that what...
No, we would never for one moment argue that you could possibly indicate that any human being is in any way less valuable.
In fact, I hope it is clear that we have criticised when that viewpoint has come up. So what do you think then, since let's say that we're going to make the statement that we deem that to be immoral, that is wrong, to say that a people group is unethical. What sort of opinions or objections?
What are you defining as people? So in terms of medical ethics, a lot of the discussion is about research on stem cells, on when life begins. What about embryos?
This is very interesting, I think.
Because one of the interesting things about the so-called three-person baby is that I believe it results in a fertilized egg being dismantled.
So there are two ways of doing it. One of them is you take an unfertilized egg and you remove the nucleus, and then you put the nucleus of the mother into that healthy unfertilized egg. So at no point there do you have a fertilized embryo that has had to be discarded. The other method, because there are two, the other method is to take an embryo to remove the... I'm trying to get my words right. So you have two embryos. One of them is an embryo that has healthy mitochondria. The other embryo has unhealthy mitochondria. The nucleus in the embryo with the unhealthy mitochondria is the nucleus of the child of the two parents who are trying to have a child.
I see.
Right. The other embryo has been donated, essentially.
I see.
So you remove the donated embryo, and then you put the embryo that you're trying to give those parents a child into that healthy.
So that
embryo.
does involve,
but that means that you have to destroy.
You have to destroy a potential life.
With that, I think I've picked up on an issue. An embryo has more than one cell. An embryo has a number of cells. So you say you can take the nucleus out. Would it
be clearer if I said zygote?
Oh yeah, zygote. Zygote makes more sense. Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I was just a bit confused.
Yep.
Yeah.
So with the second method, there
are objections.
Absolutely
valid ethical objections to that. Yes, I would agree.
But in the first method, you can't argue that you haven't got a baby being born But now we've got this system coming in. Could you say that before, where you had a child that had that was born with faulty mitochondria, they'll still be born and still live a life. The quality of life might be poor, but they still live a life. So now, are you classing those people lower than?
Yes.
Yeah. If you think about it, now you're saying actually that's a lower class of people. And we can't be saying that. That's not a good thing to say.
I think that is where there's an interesting distinction to be made between the language that has been used in the past, and then on the lines of the slippery slope, where we should be very careful about the language that is being used now.
Because someone that was born with faulty mitochondria DNA might argue, and they might go, actually, if this was true when I was born, I would never have been born.
Yes.
But, you see, I'm not entirely sure that is true, right? Because we've said that the effect of this procedure doesn't change.
Okay, fine. They would. You're right.
They would be born just without the
faulty mitochondria DNA.
You can argue that, but as well, I think it's, again, to go back to Okay, but that's not what defines someone's life. You said that environmental pressures form a person's personality.
Yeah.
They would have had a different life. They would be a different person.
They would be a completely different person.
Again,
only genetically they'll be the same.
Are you sure about that?
Yes.
Because they're in the same environment.
But they're not, because you wouldn't be in the same. If you were disabled, you'd be in a different environment than if you were not
You wouldn't
disabled.
have had carers. You would all these kinds of things.
It would be a completely different environment altogether.
It would be, but then you've got the standard of living argument.
Yes.
Because the effect of the environment in the original case is that it's a lower standard of living. So the point I was trying to make about language is if you were to be very careful with your language, you would make the distinction between saying that there is a lesser class of people, and you would actually frame it, I expect, much more as saying, here is a disease. It's an undesirable characteristic, not in the sense of not really in a moral or ethical sense, just in the sense of it's a disease.
It's unpleasant,
right?
Yes.
And is there a way of trying to
remedy this,
prevent people from having this disease? It's in some sense the equivalent of I've forgotten the word. When an organism is completely wiped out, like they did it with measles.
Extinction?
No, not extinction.
Genocide?
No.
No.
Like how there are plenty of diseases now that we don't see anymore. Not eradicate.
Oh, I don't know.
Eliminate?
No. But you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yes, we all know.
When we've managed to wipe out a disease, this is the equivalent.
Eradicate, don't you?
Kind of. This is the equivalent in this genetic case where it's a genetic disorder. The only way to eradicate that, there's no bacterium, there's no virus for you to try and kill off.
No.
You actually have to go back to the genes.
Yes, there's a bit of functional thing that's broken.
And I suppose
Machine.
a person could say that is no different to trying to wipe out a bacterium, trying to wipe out a virus.
Yes, but I think the important distinction there is that these things will always emerge as a natural consequence of healthy reproduction. In the gene pool, you will always get these faulty things emerging because the human being is so very complicated that you do get these little faulty things emerging.
Yeah.
So it's not that we're trying to eradicate something. You couldn't eradicate it because you will always get these abnormalities developing throughout the generations.
Mutations happen maybe say a mutation happens 1 in a million. That is still 1 in a million.
Yes.
It still happens.
And when you've got so many billion.
Yes, indeed.
7 billion people.
And I mean, the human lifespan isn't that long. I mean, a new generation every 25 years is really not that long.
Yes.
So I think the important distinction, I suppose that we're saying there are obvious ethical objections to that second method in which an embryo is discarded.
Yes.
Then we're saying for the first method, trying to deal with the slippery slope concern by saying that actually you're not saying this person is undesirable. Rather, you're saying, in the same way that cancer is undesirable, the common cold is undesirable.
Yes.
Measles, polio, the same way that is undesirable.
Yes.
Yes.
This is a disease. It is undesirable.
We would take preventative measures.
We don't decide to have this.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just speaking of what Matthew said earlier about getting rid of a disease, it's if a particular disease is eliminated worldwide, it is considered eradicated. The word
eradicated.
It was eradication. It was eradication.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I just completely
deserve a point for that. Just to throw a way in.
But
can I come back on your
Yeah. I want you to. I can see you sitting over there. I'm waiting. I've been waiting for you to go on.
I don't think that distinction works very well. I think it can break down very easily because how do you objectively decide what is a characteristic that reduces quality of life and what doesn't? Does being short reduce your quality of life?
Well, that's where the ethical concern comes in. That is where you make the subjective consensual
Well, you can't.
decision.
I think the important thing is to say that you can't objectively
No, you
decide.
can't. Exactly, yes.
Who decides? Who decides that?
Consensus. That's why we have laws. That's why we have
characteristic A is undesirable and characteristic B is not so.
Well, let's, this is so far from becoming a treatment. This is still so far from becoming a treatment.
Yeah.
This is now, it's in research, that if you look forward and try to imagine it in treatment, something like this is just not realistically going to become enforced. It would always be the sort of thing that would be, at least foreseeably, with the current state of affairs, this would be something that it would be up to the parents
Absolutely,
whether they
absolutely.
want to do it. There is no way it would get past human rights, rightly so, that this was enforced, that parents didn't have the freedom of choice.
Yes.
Because I was speaking to my housemate about this particular point, and she said, she actually said, no, I don't care if they've got a disability, I'd want my baby to be mine and completely 100% mine. If I could, I would choose that. If she couldn't, she said they should adopt and whatever.
Yeah.
But if she could, she'd want 100% of the genes to be hers. And I explained the science behind it. I explained that the nuclei would be this and then the mitochondria would be that. She said, no. The mitochondrial DNA and the nuclear DNA, she would want to be her. She would want her child to be 100% hers and her father's. And, the baby's father. Yeah.
And it is important on the grounds of freedom of choice that each individual is able to choose that. It makes me uncomfortable. It still makes me personally uncomfortable.
What does?
The choice that and this is just a personal thought that I haven't properly thought through. It's the kind of the immediate thing that I feel when
gut
you say
reaction.
That.
Okay.
It makes me uncomfortable that
somebody would
choose for their child to go through that
personally,
on the grounds of it being more important to them.
I can empathise.
I can empathise to an extent. Because
I can empathise.
You can see where they're coming from.
I can.
But I can see where you're coming from as well. But if this person is willing to bring up the child and you've got better medical care now, and you're going to have better medical care in the future. So if, in that maybe in 100 years it's a null point, because a baby may be born with mitochondrial DNA, faulty mitochondrial DNA, and you will still live the same life as we do.
Yeah.
I mean, there isn't maybe in 2 years we might have better care. Every day care is changing. Every day care is getting better. Better. So we there is no quality of life low that you can't have. At some point you might have a baby that's born with a fault in the mitochondrial DNA and have no less quality of life than we do.
Absolutely. So back to the question, who objectively decides whether it's an undesirable characteristic, in the same sense that nobody has objectively decided that cancer is an undesirable characteristic that must be, to some degree, bred out or treated, because you can consider this just as treatment, that it can be treated.
I think you can't really breed out cancer.
No, I know, that was what I said. It's treatment, not breeding out, in the case of cancer. But that treatment is available. I imagine it would be a similar situation to that.
Yes,
I agree. Again, it's choice though. You could say you can decide if you want to get the treatment. I know. Nobody doesn't get the treatment, but you can choose whether to get the treatment or not.
Yeah, I think the most sanguine thing to draw from that, and something that ties everything together quite nicely, is the idea that we're talking about here, what can you define as something which is undesirable? And the point is that what we're talking about here is something which is, you can argue, is rather obviously a denigration.
To some degree, you can just step back and say, this person is unwell.
They're going to have a much shortened lifespan. They can't breathe, whatever it is. But that's what we're talking about. And what the concern really comes in, and something that I think is absolutely valid from Sam's point of view, is that when we start to consider, as we are now, what happens when it's not so certain, when it's not so obvious, how do you objectively define? That's when you get to the ethical concerns of, and that leads to things like designer babies.
Yes.
And they're kind of, this is where we get to the point where it is entirely subjective, to the point that you're going to have massive contradictions. You're going to have enormous infighting. You're going to have lots of issues to solve, and that is the slippery slope. That's where it lies.
Just a quick point about I mentioned earlier about the point that was that someone that's got faulty mitochondrial DNA that's been born now, maybe they can argue that, I'm not the man that I am today if I didn't have this problem, if I didn't have this disease, and if I'd been born without the faulty mitochondrial DNA, I don't think I'm the man that I would be today. So I think they might argue that this is a bad thing, because
the alternative is completely true though. Somebody who had the treatment might say, I am so glad.
Absolutely. The converse is.
And so what does this bring home? It brings home the subjectivity.
Yes,
it does.
Absolutely.
It really does. Because of course the end point of this and the nightmarish vision is that in the end you're going to end up with two parents in the room with a nice pretty lady with a chart, all the characteristics listed in tick boxes of blue eyes, and he should be tall and handsome.
And we are just not talking about that. That is so far removed from the conversation.
We're at the top of that slippery slope. What if we fall down it?
Yes.
I really dislike
I'm just playing devil's advocate to be annoying.
I know. Right. Okay, so that's the end of the hour. Thank you very much for listening. Let's quickly go round and get a single final statement from each person. We're going to talk about overpopulation another time, but just a final statement on eugenics and maybe on this the idea of the 3-person baby.
From where I started, is eugenics a science? No. Scientific methods have been applied to eugenicists to try to warrant that, but in a word, no. Eugenics is not a science, it's an application of a scientific methodology.
Sam?
I'll end with a bold statement that eugenics is very dangerous and I wouldn't want to go anywhere near it.
Okie doke. Harry?
Well, I think I'll sit somewhere between you and say it's a very exciting time to be alive, but it's also bringing into the fore some fantastic ethical issues.
I agree with Harry.
Wonderful.
We shall see you we won't see you, obviously. We shall be talking to you. You shall hear us in 2 weeks' time. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Luckily, with luck, we'll be back with the same guests.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Akshay and Sam.
Thank you.
Lovely.
It's been an absolute pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much, guys. We're going to go out and hand some other vaccines.
It's me again. Thank you for listening to Because the Universe. Remember that our next show will be on in 2 weeks' time from whenever you were last listening. And do email us at becausetheuniverse@aol.com if you would be interested in coming on to a show. We would love to have you with us.